Subcommittee of the San Diego Community Power to session 3:32 on Tuesday, May 12th. Roll call, please. Councilmember West.
Here.
And I am here as well. Alternate member Humora from the city of La Mesa. Are there any additions or withdrawn items for the agenda? Hearing none from staff.
Nope, there are none.
Are there any non-agenda public comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar, which there is none of, and we're going to go to the regular agenda. Item number 1 is consideration of the 2020 Finance and Risk Management Committee schedule. I understand that there is a conflict with Tuesdays at 3:30 now from legal counsel. So we're going to look at alternate days, potentially Wednesdays or Thursdays. Councilmember West, anything better or worse for you at this point in time?
Yeah, both of those days are terrible for me, I have to admit. Wednesday and Thursdays are challenging. Normally I meet with the airport on Thursday, and Wednesday we have council meetings. So there's evening on Thursday is best. So that is a possibility. But the reality is that my days are always packed. So it's not like you're not gonna, yeah. I'm just saying that's probably my best bet would be Thursdays, late afternoon to evening.
Okay. I think I can probably swing a Thursday afternoon as well. So if we can kind of table that and continue that discussion and try to flesh that out a little further, let's go ahead and do that.
And
I would just say that please work with Sandra with my schedule that way, because she knows it better than I do.
okay, and just to provide a little bit of context, we do want to set a regular schedule. We feel like there's enough discussion for this committee to have at least through the remainder of 2020, and ideally we do it a week or two before each board meeting. I know it feels like we just had this committee not long ago, but here we are again. So we'll take those times into account, and then we will look for a time that works for everybody and set that as a regular standing time for this committee. So thank you.
I do think, Cody, I think it's really important I am very much in favor of setting a date that we can just have it and schedule it out for a year. So that I appreciate that.
Agreed. Okay, moving on to item 2, which is discussion on proposed amendments to the credit and collateral arrangement.
Okay, so thank you. This is Cody as well. I don't know if you want to take a moment, maybe just as people present, but making sure folks know who they are on the Zoom screen, so that folks can see people. So I'm just going to take a quick minute and do that. So aside from the committee members, you see Sebastian Saria and Chad Colton. Those are both from my team in supporting SDCP as staff in this role. You see Sean Marshall moving around there on the screen. She's with Lean Energy and is one of our consultants that does all things in sync with me, helping keep this organization running as well and starting up. And then general counsel, you see Nick put his title there, which is helpful. So thank you. That's who he is and what he does. And then the other two folks, John and Sam, are with Pacific Energy Advisors and will be presenting on the next item. So I just thought that might be helpful to give an orientation to who's who on this new digital world we're in. So for item number 2, what we're looking at is I just want to provide an update since this is the Finance Committee, and we adopted at the last meeting, the board adopted or approved agreements for credit and banking with River City Bank, and then a collateral agreement with a group called Emerald Blue. It's the private local investor who wanted to contribute to helping start up SDCP, and for a $5 million collateral loan to us. Being COVID times that we're in and kind of creating some changes for everybody, that funder has since wanted to pull back to providing $3 million instead of $5 million. So since then, we've been looking at other options. We essentially need a $5 million collateral payment in order to keep River City comfortable and moving forward with all of the financing that they will be doing for us. We're looking at a couple different options. One is finding a second local investor to provide the balance, the $2 million balance, in order to keep the Emerald Blue component whole. Another option is looking at a separate loan from Calpine, which is, as you recall, a firm that we just last month also approved an agreement with to do our data management services. We had a $2 million option in that contract that was available if we needed some sort of credit ever during the course of the contract that we adopted with them. And so we've been working with them to see if we can increase that up to $5 million. So both of these options are in process, and I will have more information for you all by the next board meeting, if not sooner. I just wanted to keep you all abreast of what's been changing there, and these are difficult times with the state of the economy and all that. So in light of all that, us still having options is really great. I just want to make sure you are aware of them, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Is there public comment on this one?
Yes.
Can we take the public comment and then we'll have a little discussion?
Yes, the public comment is submitted by Matthew Vasilakis from the City of San Diego, a resident of the City of San Diego. The comment is, dear committee members, we support whichever action the board takes to secure the necessary financing to launch San Diego Community Power. It is of the utmost importance for the board to set the path towards security and certainty and finalize the credit and collateral loans. Again, we support whatever action the board takes to achieve that goal. SDCP's launch is absolutely critical to secure our region's future. Thank you, Matthew Vasilakis, Co-Director of Policy and Coordination of the San Diego Community Choice Alliance. That concludes the end of that comment.
Councilmember West?
Yeah, just real quick, Ms. Sullivan, can you give me a little bit of background? How is River City handling all this?
Was that question for me or Sean?
Neither one of you. I'm just
I thought you said Sean. That's for you,
it's
Cody.
to you.
I'm sorry, I thought you said Sean.
No, I said Ms. Owen.
Oh, yes. I've kept them up to date on everything we're working on, and actually just spoke with them about 2 hours ago, and they're comfortable also with either path that we pursue. They're looking at some of the details of the Calpine agreement now to see if that aligns with their subordination requirements. They want to be the primary lender, but I think we're getting pretty comfortable there, and they're comfortable with those terms as well. They will finalize that in the next day or so, but in general, they're comfortable with any option that allows us to move forward.
Right. Okay, one last question. So we set that $2 million line of credit in the original Calpine agreement. Is there anything that we might need that for in the future to help us move forward on things?
That's a good point. And that's one of the reasons why I left that in there initially, even though I thought maybe we would be getting financing elsewhere. And it's an unforeseen option. I think if we do go with Calpine for the full $5 million, for example, these other funders that are now kind of waiting in the wings, I think they're not going to go anywhere, and they'd be available for additional resources in the future if we need that. We do plan on any path we take. We plan on paying off that initial $5 million within 3 years. And so after 3 years, that opens it back up for kind of, it's like a revolving line of credit. At that point, we can tap back into it again.
Understand. I think based on that, I'm not providing direction here, but I am saying that I think that I'd like to try to not use that Calpine if we can. I'd like to keep as many eggs in the egg basket, if you know what I mean. So, but if you need to, I mean, I'm either way. I just think if we can go another way to make that loan secured with River City, I think it gives us more options in the future. Sean, do you agree? You seem like you're chomping at the bit there to say something on this. You're on mute.
You're unmuted.
Okay. No, I'm just listening. Oh, good.
Okay.
I have nothing.
Perfect. Okay. That's all I have.
Yeah, real quick. I think it's great that a private party stepped up to offer us the collateral. But this is a really critical time and step for us that we got to make sure that, as the public commenter said, that this moves forward. And it's nice that he said whatever it takes to do it. And I mean, I think that's a good approach. But this is really critical for us. I'm a little bit nervous that he's hedging things at the moment for us. So thank you, Cody, for giving us some options. And I'm curious as to what River City says, but I think it's really important that we move forward with a risk-averse solution to this, because it's critical for us to get the funding secured.
Thank you.
Any other comments on item number 2? So this is just for information, correct, at this point in time?
Exactly. Just information. Just wanted to keep you updated, and I will share additional information as I have it. Thanks for the feedback.
Thank you. So item number 3 is presentation from Pacific Energy Advisors on various energy topics.
Right. So I will just introduce this, but I will let Pacific Energy Advisors dive right in after that. So one of our goals is to, on each meeting, each committee meeting and board meeting, start to expose the board members to all of the things it takes to get into the energy market and all the actions we'll need to be taking as an organization, the compliance deadlines and procurement deadlines we have to meet, as well as the board decisions that will be coming before you. And so this is one of those first steps in having this discussion with the committee. And we'd like to do this almost every committee meeting prior to the board meeting, is kind of test it out on you. And maybe you guys can do a deeper dive if you prefer on some of the details. So we have John and Sam here, and we do have a PowerPoint that I think Sebastian will pull up. And here it comes. And we're following on the agenda. I think folks have the agenda, but these are all just for information and education, and we're happy to take comments and dialogue, but don't need any critical actions today. So John, maybe I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Cody. Again, I'm John DeLessie with Pacific Energy Advisors, and so I'm going to cover a few areas, just energy procurement generally, and hopefully set the stage for us to begin assembling a resource portfolio for SDCP as we move towards the commencement of service in March. So first on the agenda here is a review of the types of energy products that SDCP will need to buy. And then we'll discuss a basic high-level timeline and overview of some of the board decisions that we see playing out over the next several months. And then we'll be discussing a preliminary proposal for the 2021 renewable energy and greenhouse gas-free portfolio targets. So we're talking about a proposed, essentially, product mix for launch. And then finally, we'll be really previewing some concepts on energy risk management and delegation of authority policies. We're going to be looking to develop a proposed policy and bring that to you and then to the board next month. And so today is really just kind of a preview of a sample of what that might look like. If we can advance the slide. So I think we might have gone over this last meeting, but just as a refresher here, there are really 4 broad categories of resources that SDCP will be purchasing. So system energy, you can kind of think of this as plain vanilla power. There's no real attribute. It's just energy that is being purchased through the California Independent System Operator. It does come with greenhouse gas emissions. So there will be, for the amount of system energy that's purchased, there will be greenhouse gas emissions associated with that, which is more or less based on the emissions rate of a natural gas generator. The next category of product is renewable energy generally. And so this is energy produced by qualifying renewable resources. There's a list maintained by the California Energy Commission. But this, I think most people are familiar with wind and solar and geothermal and biomass and so forth. And then there's this other category of GHG-free energy, which these resources do not meet the renewable portfolio standards requirements. So they're not renewable technically, but they are recognized as non-GHG emitting. So these would be facilities like large hydroelectric, over 30 megawatts. The small hydro is considered qualifying for the RPS. Large hydro does not, but it's still GHG free. And also nuclear power, again, not renewable, but considered GHG free. And then the last category, and this is really a different animal entirely. It's quite different from the other three because this is capacity. So this is resource adequacy capacity. It's not energy. And really the resource adequacy is to ensure that all load serving entities, CCA, SDCP will be a load serving entity, San Diego Gas and Electric is a load serving entity, but all load serving entities more or less have to do their part to make sure that there are enough generators available in order to support grid reliability. So you really don't get energy as a SDCP would not receive energy from the resource adequacy resources. That energy would go to somebody else typically, and the energy that's produced by those capacity resources would not show up on SDCP's power content label. So that's the mailer that gets sent out to customers once a year describing what's in the product mix, what's in the resource mix that they're receiving. So resource adequacy or RA is really quite a different concept, but we are required to procure that at a certain level in order to support grid reliability. And then similarly, I suppose the renewable energy is subdivided into categories for compliance purposes. So this is for purposes of complying with the RPS program or Renewable Portfolio Standards program. So these are the portfolio content categories 1, 2, and 3, otherwise known as the acronym PCCC 1, 2, or 3, or sometimes referred to as bucket 1, 2, or 3. And PCC 1 is the most prevalent. This is energy that's bundled. So you're buying the energy and the renewable attribute and it's delivered at the same time with no substitution of energy from another source. So typically or commonly these are renewable resources located within the state of California where you're buying the energy and you're also claiming the renewable attribute. Can also be imported renewable energy as long as certain scheduling protocols are observed where there's an attempt to ensure that that power is actually delivered into California. So the PCC1 is the highest cost of the 3 categories of renewable energy, but it's also the highest value in the sense that there are no limitations on its use for RPS compliance. Generally speaking, there's either no or very low greenhouse gas emissions associated with these resources. It depends on the technology, but solar and wind, for instance, are 0 GHG free. Geothermal has a relatively low emissions rate, although it is positive. So that's PCC1. That's going to be the vast majority of the renewable portfolio. Then we move on to PCC2, and this one's a little unique, but what this is that it's a renewable resource that's located outside of the state. And so you're buying the renewable, more or less the renewable attribute from that resource, but then the energy that's actually imported into the state comes from another another source. Typically, it's a non-renewable source that the energy flowing into California is actually provided from. So it's again, like I said, it's a little bit of a unique animal. And the benefit of using PCC2 is that it's a lower cost. It comes at a lower cost than PCC1. There are limitations on the amount that can be used for RPS compliance. And there are also greenhouse gas implications because the greenhouse gas emissions that would be kind of associated with this type of a product is based on the source of the imported power, not the renewable generator. So if the energy that's actually being imported is, let's say, natural gas, there's going to be a positive emissions rate. It's possible to make sure that the imported power is GHG-free itself, so it could be nuclear or large hydro, in which case there would be no GHG emissions associated with the product. But it's a little bit of an in-between product. And then the last one is PCC3. So this is the classic unbundled REC, where one would simply be buying the renewable attribute or the REC and not receiving any energy at all. That's produced by that resource. So this offers a lot of flexibility, but it's very limited in how much can be used for RPS compliance. It is very low cost, but it also provides no GHG benefit to the purchaser under the current accounting rules. So those are the kind of the three main. You can think of them as compliance categories or contractual structures of renewable energy purchases. And I think we can move on from here. So this is kind of an outline of the timeline, high level for the remainder of the year. We're looking to achieve a number of procurement milestones and board approvals over the next several months. This month, we're starting off with a discussion and hopefully preliminary approval of renewable energy and greenhouse gas-free targets. We need this because we're going to be starting to line up resources over the next few months, and so it really defines how much and of what type of resource we need to line up for procurement. And we'll be discussing this element in a few minutes, the proposed targets for SDCP. And then next month, we'll be asking, as I mentioned before, for approval of a risk management and delegation of authority policy. We'll be talking about that more later today as well. On the procurement front, which is sort of the list of activities on the right side of this table in blue, the initial focus is going to be heavily on resource adequacy and long-term renewable energy. And the reason for that is really, in terms of the sequencing, is resource adequacy. We need to have everything under contract by the compliance deadline of October 31st of this year. And so we'll have to have everything for next year under contract, as well as for the local resource adequacy obligation for the next 3 years in somewhat declining amounts. But there is an obligation to have contracts in place by October 31st. It's also a market that is somewhat difficult, and so there's just going to be a tremendous focus and emphasis on putting together the resource adequacy portfolio, including issuing a request for offers by SDCP, participating in an anticipated request for offers issued by San Diego Gas and Electric, and just quite frankly, picking up the phone and working the Rolodex to pull together resource adequacy contracts. The other short-term focus for us is the long-term renewable procurement, and This is also a compliance obligation. So under the RPS rules, a percentage of SDCP's renewable energy requirements have to be with long-term contracts. So that's contracts of 10 years or longer duration. And that obligation is measured over a 3-year period beginning 2021, but it more or less kicks in 21. So, there's not a whole lot of lead time. Typically, long-term renewable contracts are new construction type, new build. Again, similar to the ERA, we're going to have a lot of irons in the fire in terms of how we meet this obligation and procure, including hopefully the possible sale by SDG&E of some long-term contracts. As the load moves over, they will have excess. So the anticipation is that they will be selling those off, and that'll be an opportunity for SDCP to procure some of those long-term renewable contracts. In August, we expect that the board would approve an integrated resource plan.
Councilmember West.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I actually should have asked it a little bit earlier. I'm looking at you kind of made October as contracts need to be in place as an important part of this upcoming year. And I'm looking at this board approvals and procurement milestones, and I see execute contracts kind of in that last block, but I don't see anything. Is that something that needs to be tracked on this? I'm just curious. It seems you made a point of it, so it seemed kind of important to me. And then I'm like, well, looking on here, trying to find that. So what do you think, John?
Right. So the October 31st is the regulatory filing that needs to go to the CPUC. So all the contracts, need to be executed ahead of that. Okay. The board action on that, I think that is anticipated to be covered in the delegation of authority.
Okay.
So
I agree with that comment. If that's an important milestone, let's go ahead and highlight it.
That'd be great.
Okay. Any other questions while we're paused here? Nope. Okay. So then I think I was speaking about the integrated resource plan. That is a regulatory requirement as well that's due September 1st this year. It was originally, I think, May 1, but it's been pushed back a couple of times. So it's now September 1. And this will be, it'll reflect SDCP's planned resources through 2030. And there's a greenhouse gas emissions limit or benchmark that's been established by the CPUC, and the plan will have to show that the resources will meet that benchmark. So we expect to be working on that draft plan over the next few months and ultimately bring it to the board for approval in August and then file that in September. And then in September, if all is going well, if we're successful, we hope to bring one or more long-term renewable energy contracts to the board for approval. This would either come out of the SDG&E RFO that we anticipate, or potentially result from the RFO initiated by SDCP, which we're expecting to put out in June. The RFO process, SDCP's RFO process, probably will take a little longer to come to conclusion in terms of having actual contracts. So it's likely that those contracts would actually come later than September, but we do think it's possible if we're successful with the SDG and the RFO to have contracts so they're ready for approval in September. That is the plan and the hope anyway. And then as we get toward the end of the year, we'll have an opportunity to really refine the procurement targets. We'll have much better information about 2021 SDG&E rates, PCIA/exit fees, power costs closer to actual delivery, So some of what we're going to be talking about today as preliminary portfolio structure, I think can be refined and finalized as we get closer to the end of the year. And then we'd also be looking to get board approval for completing the other contracts, the system energy contracts, potentially some shorter term renewable and greenhouse gas free contracts towards the end of the year as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So, so on a preliminary recommendation for starting out in 2021, recommending the portfolio would include the default service offering at 50% renewable energy, and 5% would be other greenhouse gas-free energy, so probably large hydro, and then the remainder would be this just system energy, just kind of the plain vanilla power. So the offering would be, if you add up the 50 and the renewable and the 5% GHG-free, it would be overall 55% greenhouse gas, non-greenhouse gas emitting resources. And then there'd be an opportunity, an optional product. Customers could opt up to 100% renewable energy if they so desired. There would be a premium for that relative to the default service offering. We'd anticipate that premium. We will be talking about that when it comes to time later in the year to talk about rate setting, but we'd anticipate that premium would be more just largely based on the incremental cost of the renewable energy relative to the default product. We're recommending that in terms of the breakout of the renewable energy that we use the PCC2 up to the RPS program limits. And what that translates into is approximately 82% of the renewable energy, so 82% of the 50% would be PCC1, and then 18% of the renewable energy would be PCC2. And again, this is designed just to offer some cost reductions relative to an all PCC1 portfolio and help maximize opportunities for potential rate discounts. As I mentioned, this is preliminary. It would give us some guidance to begin procurement, but it would be by no means final. And as we get better information and more certainty towards the end of the year, this could be revised or refined. And on the,
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Good job so far. But when LA Clean Power, when they kicked off, what were their benchmarks for this, for their default service offering? Do you know off the top of your head?
I'm not sure. No, I don't know. I mean, we can certainly find that out, but I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm just kind of curious that while they have more committees, I mean, I think we're very similar, and I was just wondering what they kicked off on their level would be interesting. You don't have to answer it today, but I'd like that answer in the future. And then one of the questions that keeps coming up is, can this is the default with an option for customers, but can cities inside SDCP pick to be on a higher level than the default? I mean, from the city of Imperial Beach's perspective, I'm going to want to be as much as green as possible, but I also have to really be careful with cost. City of Encinitas, they're not as concerned about their cost, and they want to make sure that they're almost the highest clean GHG-free energy and renewable energy. So is it possible to do that?
Yeah, it is feasible to do that. There are examples of other CCAs having done that. There's a little bit of additional complication. Presumably there would be different rates, right? If the city wanted a more expensive portfolio as a default, presumably there would be a different set of rates for the customers in that city. But Yeah, it is feasible, and from a procurement perspective, it's quite straightforward.
Yeah.
We would just need to know who's in and who's out, so to speak.
Okay, I think what I'm really I think that's something that would be great to include on this, that when you're talking about this, that you bring this up to the full board, because I think this is something that I've heard at least one of the other board members bring up, and I think it'd be important to have that in your back pocket so you can talk to that. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think then if we can move to the last slide for this section.
And if I could chime in quickly, I'm sorry, I have a lot of background noise, so hopefully you can still hear me. One thing to think about also, maybe for Mark too, your question around what LA launched at. Every year it's different because market prices are changing, so we won't be directly comparable for that reason. I think they probably launched at a conservative level for them in that market at that time. So we'll look to see what they launched at and try to provide some comparisons. I just want to put that context around it.
Well said, Cody. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Sean. Did you want to add in?
Nope, I'm hoping to have that to you by the end of this meeting. I'm looking it up right now.
Perfect. You're such a rock star, Sean. I just want you to know that.
Not true. It's all the rest of these folks.
All right, so over time, we do expect, based on our modeling, that SDCP will be able to increase its renewable energy and overall GHG-free energy content, outpacing both the California RPS, so the kind of the minimum requirements, as well as what we expect from SDG&E. Again, these are projections, so nothing final about these numbers. But based on current market prices and our expectations of rates going forward, we think that it is feasible to keep pushing these numbers up in achieving a 60%, for instance, overall greenhouse gas free content by 2024. Again, we'll this is something that, as we start putting the procurement strategy into place, there's a lot of flexibility in the forward years, right? So we would be looking to bring contracts that do include forward deliveries, out the next, let's say, 3 to 4 years, but they wouldn't be up to the 100% level. So there would be plenty of flexibility to revise the overall targets, just based on pricing and other factors.
John,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt again, but one of the things that all cities have got our cap that we need to follow to our climate action plan that actually has specific dates when we're going to be 100%. It'd be nice if it said somewhere on here that you have verified that we will be able to meet the cap goals for each one of the cities by this date, or so we all know, so the board can immediately look at the bottom and say, okay, yes, this puts me on track to meet my climate action plan goals for the future.
Okay.
Got it.
We'll have to work with Cody and perhaps Sean to incorporate
Yeah.
that information.
We'll work on that. We could do that.
One more thing on this slide, the 2024 SDG&E, I think it's just probably a typo that's at 46 rather than something higher.
Okay.
Okay.
This is Sam. It's actually not a typo. Basically, we had to work backwards from whatever RPS procurement plan they had submitted on there, and the 23 and 24 figures are directly from their plan. So that's just not a typo.
They actually go down.
Yeah, according to the RPS procurement plan. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure exactly what SDG&E's procurement future strategy is, but we're just putting on here what we see on their latest procurement plan. That's all we can do.
Very good. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, and so that's the end of this section. What we still have to go, it would be the preview of the risk management delegation of authority. So we could, if there are other questions, we could pause now, or we could just power through.
Can I just ask one quick one on slide 4, where you talk about the PCC content and describing it? The PCC3 category, which is the cheapest one, you have listed as limited value. Is that just limited environmental value?
It's limited environmental value. I'd say in a few ways. So one is that it provides no greenhouse gas benefit to the purchaser. The other way it's limited in value is that it's limited in terms of like a specific quantity limit in how much can be used for RPS compliance. So that's not really an environmental criteria, but the regulatory value. And then there's just a lot of sort of, I guess, it's sort of a bad name in many quarters, the concept of unbundled recs. So I think there's some limited PR value, or maybe some actual PR cost to use of unbundled recs.
Thank you. Councilmember West, any more questions on this segment before we move to the next?
No, I'm good. Is there any public or anything like that? Or is that all? Are we saving that to the end? I don't know. Never mind. Just go move forward.
Wait, I'll just add something here. On the PCC3 or Category 3 or unbundled recs, whatever you want to call them, just to remind you, in our JPA, we do say we would avoid the use of these this product. So I just want to put that out there.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
Okay, and so with this, I think I'm gonna turn it over to Sam to walk through this section.
Okay, thank you, John. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the risk management policy because one of the things we want to get feedback on from this presentation is on the delegation of authority. So just to try to frame what risk management policy is and what the purpose of it is. So during the SDCP's normal course of business, you'll be managing risks associated with this being in the California wholesale energy markets. And a key component of effectively managing your procurement and portfolio risks is being able to identify, measure, and control your market and credit risks. And so the energy risk management policy basically allows you to do that by providing the framework around which SDCP manages the various market and credit risks and outlines the roles and responsibilities for those people who are responsible for managing those risks vis-a-vis different things, including delegation of authority. Next slide, please. So the key components of the energy market risks are these 6 items here. And after I name them, I'll give a little bit of a description for each one. There's market price risk, there's counterparty credit risk, load and generation volumetric risk, operational risk, liquidity risk, regulatory and legislative risk. So market price risk is probably the most easy to understand. It's simply the risk that market prices could move out of, call it out of the money. So basically it's something that if you have a position, for instance, it goes against you, or if you don't have a position, it could be cheaper, more expensive. But remember, market price risk can also move in your favor. So to the extent that you have a position, it can also move, you could also be in the money. So it's just basically risks and fluctuations in market prices. Counterparty credit risk is the risks that the counterparties that you're actually doing business with are basically they have an inability or unwillingness to perform according to their contractual obligations. So then you'd actually have to go out there and you know, get what you need again. So that's what credit risk mainly is comprised of. On the load and generation volumetric risk, so let me try to break that up into maybe two components. So on the load side, so load volumetric risk is the risk that you say there's inaccurate forecasts of what you think your load may be, which could lead to, say, inaccurate overhedging or underhedging, which could possibly impact your budget. Generation volumetric risk is the risk that for whatever, say you have a resource a generator that you've contracted with, that they end up not delivering what you had expected. Operational risk. So operational risk is the risk of say, failure to act effectively, to plan, execute, and control your business activity. And that's something that you know, the delegation of authority is supposed to help manage. It's an important part of what the risk policy does for SDCP. Liquidity risk is a risk that SDCP will be unable to meet its financial obligations. So basically, you think of it as the cash flow crunch type of issue. Regulatory and legislative risk is essentially the risk that for shifting or changing state and federal rules, policies, regulations, laws, basically have a negative impact on SDCP. So those are the six main energy market risks that SDCP will be facing, and that we'll be discussing and addressing in the upcoming risk management policy. Next slide, please. So what are the key elements of the risk management policy to try to help manage those six key risks we saw earlier? So the first step would be to try to define what SDCP's risk management goals and principles are. And this excerpt is almost identical or verbatim out of your JPA. So we try to see what is your goal or ambition. And so what we gleaned out of there is that you would be managing your energy portfolio with the purpose of reducing energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. So that sounds in line with what we're hearing. Promoting electrical rate price stability and fostering local benefits while minimizing risks at the same time. So that's kind of like your mission for risk management, your goal. For internal control principles, we basically look at that as a way to have business practices that are designed to prevent errors and improprieties, accurate and timely reporting of results, facilitating attainment of business objectives. And the key principles of internal control include the segregation of duties. So that's the separation between what the front office does, the mid office does, and what the back office does. And of course, the delegation of authority for procurement. You can't just let anybody go out there and procure energy. You have to set up some sort of guidelines and authority levels and thresholds for that. And that's what we'll be discussing at the end here. You also need risk management business practices. And a key component of this is the requirement to report risk metrics such as open positions, value at risk, and credit exposure on a routine basis. And you can almost view this as, it's a routine portfolio check, kind of seeing this is your portfolio, these are your requirements based upon the preliminary targets that you've set or the targets that you've set, what we've procured on behalf of that, and what your open positions and risks are based on that. Risk management governance. So of course, how do you actually operate this risk management and policy? So the board may delegate the oversight of this risk management committee to any existing or new committee it chooses. It's done in different ways in different CCAs that we've seen or assisted with. Sometimes it's they have different board members in addition to executive team. Sometimes it's the executive team, but that's open to for discussion and whatever SDCP thinks is most fitting for what it wants to do. Next slide, please. So we wanted to get a, show a preview of what a delegation of authority could look like for SDCP. And I want to stress, again, this is a preview, it's a draft, it has no absolute bearing on what you should decide on, but we just wanted to run this by you, talk about a few items, and to see, basically get your feedback as we draft up what we think it should look like and present it in the June board meeting. But the purpose of the delegation of authority, it's a tool, it's a policy tool that allows you to basically execute contracts. So procure energy, if you will, in an efficient and timely manner, right? So basically you don't want to be having to come back to the board every time before you do a transaction. You want to set up some authority for whether it's the CEO, whether it's the COO, Director of Procurement, risk committee, or the board, what based upon the level of, say, values or times or different things. We'll talk about each one in the next table. So that's kind of the purpose of a delegation of authority. The dollar amounts that we're looking at, the dollar thresholds, are based on the notional value of each individual transaction. So notional value essentially means P times Q, price times quantity. The oversight of this delegation of authority. So the initial thought is that the DOA will be overseen and managed by a risk oversight committee. That will be formed later, and it will be advisory in nature, and it could be comprised of SDCP leadership, and as I mentioned earlier, if it's advisory in nature, some board members, or it could be just SDCP leadership, which that's to be determined. And the request here again is to just maybe get some feedback on the draft delegation of authority table that we're going to just preview in the next slide.
Hey Sam, when
Yes.
you said the risk oversight committee, that isn't that us?
Yeah, to be clear, that is you all for now.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, that's
Right.
not very, and I have to admit that's not very clear in here either. That this is we've already set this up and it's already in play. You know what I mean? And we've got the risk and finance. I think it just should be stated in here someplace.
But this is Sean Marshall. I'd like to chime in really quick.
Please.
And Sam and John, please correct me if I'm wrong here. I think there's also an opportunity, however, to think about a different ROC, if you will, risk oversight committee for this specific purpose. That is not a standing board committee, and it is comprised of usually the CEO, the Director of Power Procurement, when that person comes on board, as well as PEA folks and all the rest of it. It's very much a committee where you're going through some of the nitty-gritty details of contracts. Some of that information can often be proprietary. So there's a reason why in the slide it says that the committee is advisory. So I don't think we have to decide today, but I would advise that you guys would leave the door open to a separate ROC that is more of an internal function that maybe is a subset of this particular committee.
So they're essentially, what you're saying, Sean, is that they're handling the day-to-day decision making, and this committee is the overall approving authority. Is what you're kind of. Is that what you're?
That might be one way to do it. I wanted, before we went off too much and said, yes, this committee is the one. This is a Brown Act committee, and the committee we're talking about has some different composition and is advisory. Sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would definitely reiterate that. There tends to be a lot of market sensitive information that's discussed at the ROC committee, and it just wouldn't be appropriate, in my opinion, to do that in a public setting. So maybe that committee could report to this committee. I don't know. It's up to you, but yeah, I think Sean.
I would just.
Yeah.
I think. It's not, just in this oversight portion, I would just kind of expand on that a little bit and kind of put in a little bit what Sean said and what John said. And so we have So people could understand that, because I think, I mean, I immediately went, well, isn't this the committee that would be doing that? But now that I understand it, I think it just needs a little bit clearer statement in there.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
I agree that it'd be good to flesh that out a little bit better, that this is in addition to our committee.
Yeah.
Right. And we talked about that initially when we formed this committee, that for now you'd be finance and risk, but eventually we'd have to break that out and make the risk portion, for all the reasons that they just stated, be more of an internal committee. But you're right, Mark, for now you have that title.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that question. So this is a draft example, just to get a preview of what a DOA, and this hasn't been totally fleshed out. There are different parts of this, but as a starter, so the notional values here, just to let you know that these are estimated average procurement transaction sizes based upon what we've seen and what we've kind of envisioned for SDCP size to be doing. And just refresh everyone's memory. So SDCP is estimated to procure anywhere between $450 to $500 million annually, just to put things into context here. So and again, just very preliminary, we put it in orange here. So for instance, the CEO, for instance, could have authority for a notional value up to 50 million. And, we can do it in terms of dollar value, or we can do it in terms of tenor, right? So in terms of years, like up to 1 year, up to 2 years, or 3 years, or we can do it a combination of both. So right now we haven't broken out by tenor. And like I said, this is draft. We just want to kind of show some figures up here. So in this instance here, we're looking at the CEO having a notional value authority up to 50 million. And say the average annual total megawatts or megawatt hours, depending on the product here, are what you see on the screen here. So for system power, for instance, you could have up, say, on the average 400,000 megawatt hours in terms of the transaction, and it's the usual term for these things are 1 to 3 years, and in this instance, the calculation is based on, say, a 3-year term, just to try to see what the maximum amount could kind of look like. And the ballpark prices that we see for that, and to come up with the notional value you see on the far right there. And so this is just to kind of give you an idea of what the different values could look like based upon what average transaction sizes you could maybe anticipate for SDCP. For RA, resource adequacy, that's based upon megawatts and price on dollars per kilowatt month. So again, looking at a 3-year term on 100 megawatts per month. So 27 million. Short-term renewables, so shorter in term versus a long-term renewables, obviously. But say up to 19 million for 3-year term, and carbon-free, GHG-free. That's going to be a smaller transaction, so maybe up to 1.5 million notional value. So again, these are just ballpark figures, and just a thought that maybe this is something that the CEO could have authority for. And again, this does not include, say, a tenor limit. So in terms of tenor, meaning number of years, we could say some CCAs say, for instance, they say, well, we want the CEO only to have authority for up to 1 year for a transaction. It doesn't matter what the notional value is necessarily, but it's just more based on term. But you could be based, again, on term and by notional value. So up to 50 million, and the thought maybe the risk oversight committee that we just described could have authority for up to, say, 75 million. And again, these are just numbers we're throwing out here. And an example of something where that would come into play is if they do a larger size system power deal, a bigger hedge, that would be over 50 million, and that would be required a risk oversight committee authority approval. And anything over 75 million would require board approval. And that's where you saw the previous charts that John came up with, that he showed earlier, that we had to, we thought would possibly need board approval based upon potential size. And those items would be, say, long-term renewable contracts, larger, not only larger in size, but they're also quite long in tenor, right? These deals are 10 years plus. And, for a fixed price long-term renewable contract, those are normally new build renewable projects, and they normally are minimum 15 years just for them to get financing. So on something like that, you're looking at a notional value for up to 210 million, for instance. So that clearly requires board approval. If we do long-term renewables based on an index plus type of transaction, and those tend to be existing renewable contracts, for instance, they could be, say, 10 years. They don't necessarily have to be longer because they don't necessarily require project financing. They're also, as an index plus, it's just a plus component for pricing. So looking at 90 million, so again, it's still over 75 million. And finally, just want to say on the system power side, so system power, traditionally, we're looking at, the values you see above there under the, 400,000 or 500,000 for larger size. But you saw it in the initial, in the timeline that John presented, that we're looking for board approval probably for those system power contracts, because for your initial launch, you're going to need big purchases to basically cover your first year, not just your first year, but a portion of your second year, a portion of your third year, based upon your risk tolerance hedge percentages. And we will discuss that separately, also probably amongst in the ROC type of meeting, in terms of, and what that means is that, for instance, if you were 1 year out, you want to be 80% hedged, 2 years out, 60% hedged, 3 years out, 40% hedged, whatever those amounts are, those are the bigger purchases that would require that would be higher notional value, that would require board approval. So I'm going to pause here and see if what kind of questions or thoughts you guys may have from that.
Sean, Sean, did you want to say something? You were jumped at your phone, jumped at your screen like there was something going on there.
I thought that I was unmuted for a minute. No, all I would say here is that even though this probably looks like a bit of sticker shock to you guys, because it's entirely different from a local government CEO or city manager threshold, PEA has done their homework on this and has identified these thresholds that are consistent with what San Diego's load will be in terms of notional value. And I also just want to say this is a very common practice. This delegation of authority policy and thresholds like this are very common for CCA. So with that, I'll be quiet now.
Okay. So the I'm not having a sticker shock, but you kept bringing up the term time, and I'm curious to see what is the advantage of doing it via term versus a notional value?
So the advantage of a term, and again, this is a draft, and we could combine the term and the notional value, both of them. We could say up to, for instance, for this CEO authority, we could say up to 3 years and 50 million, for example, or up to 1 year and 50 million, whatever it is. So to answer your question directly, the advantage of having a term of, say, 1 year, even though it's no guarantee of limiting the amounts that you'd be exposing SDCP to, it's a way to do it. But I mean, there's nothing to block the transaction from being a gigantic transaction for 1 year, but chances are it's going to be difficult to do something like that. So that's the advantage of having a term limit.
I think to add to that too is, I think the thinking for the CCAs that do this by term instead of dollar amount, the idea is that there's sort of this operational period that staff needs to be able to run the business and buy power as necessary. So like the shorter term transactions, they just need carte blanche to be able to execute. And also the nature of the power markets, it's not like you get a bid for system energy and that bid is good for a month. It's good for 2 hours max. It's a commodity, right? Just like the stock market, it's always changing. So I think that's rationale for giving the CEO authority for anything less than, let's say, 12 months, because it's just really, you know, part and parcel of running the business. Longer term contracts you have more time on typically, and it's more, maybe there are more policy implications there, that it would be appropriate to, you know, to bring up the chain of command.
You know, committee member Herrera, I know you've run a power plant in your previous life. When you, I think that I'm very interested in doing a kind of a hybrid between the two, because I think that might work better. But I'm just looking for your input. I mean, the rest of this I'm okay with. That's the only thing that was kind of that I was a little bit concerned with.
Yeah, I agree that I think the hybrid approach with the dollar value and term is the way to go. Speaking as a current city manager, it is a little sticker shock for me because my authority is $1,000. That's it. But I understand there's a bunch more zeros here. So I respect having the CEO having that authority and the ability to do that. I think that's a good idea, but I like the hybrid approach. I agree with that. My only other comment would be, so for the Risk Oversight Committee, that authority, the 75 million, seems close to the CEO's authority. So that may be something we want to look at. And I can't quite envision how, you know, we're going to have to set this up, but having the Risk Oversight Committee in place, is that something that they could make a decision on in a matter of hours or days? So we need to understand a little bit more about the flexibility of that committee before we figure that out, before we decide how close that authority should be to the CEO's authority.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I just wanted to point out that currently in that approval table that John showed earlier, we currently don't have, I don't know if you recall, we currently don't have the Risk Oversight Committee approval on there anyway, because it is not formed yet, to your point. So right now it's either the CEO or the board, but we could certainly take a look at how we could insert that in there one way or another. But yeah, obviously the ROC, Risk Oversight Committee, would have to be formed before we can even roll that out. Yeah, I would almost ask, you know, how is this something that maybe if we bring it up in June, that the board can formally say, yes, we do form a ROC and it's going to be comprised of these members, for instance. You know, based on what we propose or something like that.
I have to admit, I think I agree with. It seems like to me that a lot of the way you're talking, Sam, is that this ROC should be set up, and I know Cody and I actually talked about setting up a ROC in the future. And as much work as we got to split the finance and the risk committee out. I mean, if we're really talking about this much, it should be someplace previously in this PowerPoint that kind of says, this is a time when we're going to do this, or this is a time when we suggest doing this, you know, because I don't think right now this leaves a lot of, well, it could happen here, it could happen there. And that doesn't go well in government. We tend to miss those when we do it that way.
So John DeLessie, I would love it if you could go back in your memory banks, because John DeLessie's been doing CCA work long before I ever arrived on the scene. And he's done startup, probably like nearly all of them now, John. A lot of the CCAs did not have ROCs, especially in the early days. I know most of them do now. So how did this particular issue work out because with San Diego, we know it's a relatively small board. They're already tasked with a number of committees and kind of more to come. So how do we thread the needle on this before there's actually staff that's hired to be on this committee? And what would the recommendation be?
Yeah, I think really good question, Sean, and I agree. I think it's more typical that the rock is sort of stood up, once the program's up and running for a bit, and and even some of these transaction sizes that are on this table, these are typical of routine transactions you'd be doing, once you've launched. And as Sam mentioned, the first set of contracts, those are going to be larger. And so in my experience, the initial setup contracts, they typically go to the board, or at least the kind of the form of the agreement, right, and the concepts, and then the rock kind of comes later. I think the one piece that I think we really want to be careful about, though, is the resource adequacy. I think we would definitely, we don't need a rock for that, but I think the delegation authority is very important, because you're going to, in all likelihood, have a lot of small contracts, and it's something that has to be done pretty quickly, and there's just really, it's not well suited to an approval process, a formal approval process. So it's much better if it's under some sort of a delegation of authority. But yeah, I do think the rock could come later, and it would be a matter of a kind of a combination of delegation of authority, and then we just determine what is beyond the CEO's authority that we need to bring to the board, and then we could bring this into play next year sometime, potentially.
I think that help frames it better, saying that the rock's going to get stood up, say, this time next year when we're actually up and running. And if you describe the story as, well, we have to get up and running first. The board's going to make the majority of the decisions, and then the CEO is going to pick up some pieces as we move along. But once we settle in, then the rock will shift into place.
Concur. I think that's a good idea. The only other thing I would say is I think we decided that let's put a term do the hybrid approach on this as well. And I'm good with that for sure.
Agreed here as well.
All right, thank you for your feedback. I don't have anything further to add here, unless there are other questions or.
Yeah, the one last thing that, Sam, is there anything in this document, in this numbers that you think that we're missing that we need to give you feedback on? Or do we give you everything you need to go and be ready for the board next month? John or Sam?
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
Okay, gotcha.
sorry about that.
I thought I was on mute for a minute. I'm like, wait a minute.
No, I'm just thinking.
So maybe I could help with this question, because that's a great question. Are we comfortable with the limits of 50 million for CEO, and then the rest, anything beyond 50, goes to the board for now? Is that the delegation of authority level you're comfortable with, or do you want everything to go to the board until these items are settled? I'm hearing the former, but I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the former, I would not want everything to go to the board. I think that's fine for some of the longer term high value deals, but I think there's going to be smaller ones that would be much better just to work through your authority, Cody, be much more efficient. And I think really trying to go through the board on some of these contracts is not even feasible, because the market's moving. It's a tough market on RA, like I mentioned, and I just think we need to be well positioned to be able to execute quickly.
I do like the idea, though. I think Committee Member Herrera, he brought it up, but I think I'm very interested in that too. Why the risk and the CEO are so close, and then why the risk and the board are like right on top of each other. That doesn't seem like a very good spread. I would think there would be like a 50, 75, and 100 for the board, or something like that. You know what I mean? It's 50, 75, and 75 just doesn't seem right to me.
Well, it's not 50, 75, and 70. It's 50, 75, and anything above 75. But yeah, your point's taken.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well maybe, yeah, that's true. I missed the above.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam.
No, but you're right though. I think the rock, you know, again, it was here just to get your feedback, and your feedback was valuable, and it sounds like we'll just create that later. The only other thing I was thinking of to add in addition to the tenor that you guys suggested is that there may be some different variations of this in the sense that it's not just the CEO. Maybe we keep it to CEO for right now, but the thought is that as maybe as SDCP matures, we can add you know, even further delegation, like maybe to a COO or director of procurement that would be at a lower level. But other than that, I think I can't think of anything else right now.
I'm okay with the 50 million. If we add in the term that we talked about for the CEO authority, based on you know, your expertise, based on the 40 to 50 million annually. Proportionally, I think that's appropriate to where we're at right now. And also, again, with the explanation and caveat that this is what we're doing for startup to get us going, and then we'll revise as necessary and add in the rock a year later.
Yeah.
Concur with Committee Member Hamura.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's excellent. I think that's good feedback for us, and I do believe we have what we need to turn this into a proposal.
All right, anything else for item 3?
Sorry, guys, this is Sean. Before we move on, I just wanted to report out, Councilmember West asked about Clean Power Alliance. So what I can report is that when they launched, and it should be noted that they have 3 power supply options. Their lowest product, if you will, they call lean power. It's 36% renewable. Then they have a midline, which is clean power at, when they launched at 61%, and they have 100% renewable option. Today, those numbers are at 36% for the lower end, 50% for the midline, and then they also have that voluntary 100% option. So that's just something to be aware of, and if you have any further questions, we can research them after the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good question, Sean. Quick question. The 36%, the lean option, the bargain, that's basically the minimum for RPS, right? So that would be equivalent of a utility that bought the very minimum amount as required by the state, right?
I believe that's true, although they might have been slightly higher when they launched in 2018. I think
Okay.
2018 it was more like 34%, but yes, in general, they're comparable to the state's RPS. They do have a slightly higher carbon-free portfolio, but that's the point of that option, is that that's the price-sensitive option for EA customers.
Awesome, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add on to that? So Sean, this was really good information, and I think John and I were talking earlier also about this, about the launch and the renewable amounts and everything, and then bear in mind that you know, this is at launch, and even some of the other CCAs that have a really high renewable energy percentage and GHG-free percentage, when they first launched, they were also lower. So you know, it's almost as if you know, the launching period it's a very difficult time, and you know, once you get your legs underneath you, you can always up it and change it the way you'd like to. Just wanted to. I know the point's been made, but I just wanted to throw that out there again.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's important, because I think it sounds like to me that like they're just trying to get it going. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So thank you.
All right, anything else on item 3? Okay, moving on to director's comments. Councilmember West, additional comments?
I think there's a couple things. I think I really appreciate all the work that goes into to put this together, as far as just on the Zoom and and having to work through this. So I appreciate everybody working together, and I appreciate Cody giving me a little of a information tutorial about a lot of this ahead of time. So thank you so much for all you guys are doing. And I look forward to the day when I can see Nick wearing pants, flip-flops again. So that's it.
Thank you. My only comment is to thank my council member Baber for nominating me to be the chair of this committee in my absence.
That'll be in the notes.
All right, General Counsel Nick, what do you got? Show us your pants.
I have no report. No jeans.
Thank you. I believe we are adjourned at 4:52. Thank you all very much.
Nice job on the first